The Army Men franchise is kinda like a rabbit. It shit out a ton of babies and then died after a relatively short life. 3DO, the company responsible for said shitting, put out 19 Army Men games in a 4-year period. That's like 4.5 a year on average. And with the finished product, you can really feel that crunch. Nothing is quite fully baked, and even the high points of the series almost always seem to come with the caveat of enjoying them for their potential and not necessarily what was actually delivered.
I think anyone aware of this series sort of understands that they're flawed games, and that's probably putting it lightly. While I will talk a bit on that, I'm not really interested in shitting on these games or making that the focus of this video. I'm not sure if it's just nostalgia or the potential for the concept or what have you, but I have a soft spot for the Army Men franchise.
The prospect of running around as a little guy in a giant-sized, normal, everyday environment is never not going to be appealing to me.
And look, it's not a fetish thing, okay? It's just childlike whimsy, all right? I don't want to be a little stepped on guy, okay? Army Men, the game, not the franchise, is an isometric real-time tactics game.
At least that's what Wikipedia says, but
I think isometric shooter is maybe a closer description.
while your approach to certain situations may be tactical, you won't be positioning different squads of guys or anything like that. Outside of generic green dudes you can occasionally boss around, you'll be solely playing as Sarge. But not this Sarge. At least I don't think.
Sarge is a soldier for the Green Nation who carries out missions against the Tan Army. Green good, Tan bad, you get it. That's about all the story we have here. Throughout these missions, you'll fight through exciting terrain like the desert, the bayou, and the alpine. You may be confused. What does this have to do with my fetish? None of these are giant real-world locations to run around in. Those are just regular-sized real-world locations. And wilderness at that. Where's the sandbox level, or the spooky garage full of spiders the same size as me, or the toilet I can snipe people from? Well, they're not here. And as strange as that is, and it is pretty strange, I mean, why make them little toys if you're just gonna put them in a world scaled to them? And it's not even like a little diorama world or something either. Nothing would change if these were just flesh and blood humans, so what gives? Well, the answer lies within an interview with Chris Wilson, the game's producer, featured in the November 1996 issue of Next Generation magazine. He says, "We were debating about how realistic we wanted to make it, and we were also worried about how we could reach the German market since, for this kind of title, Europe will make up about half our sales, with the bulk of that selling in Germany. The Germans are extremely uptight about realistic violence, so Command & Conquer, for instance, changed all its units into robots, and changed some of the cutscenes. But we didn't want to have to do 2 versions, and very early on in the design process, we'd been planning things out with little plastic army men. So we suddenly realized that this was what everyone always likens a game like this to anyway. So it was just the most natural idea in the world to keep it that way. We'll animate them realistically, but they'll be plastic." I just feel like that's probably how he talks. Seems to me, based on what he said, the game's development was already underway. Army Men would have initially been some kind of military game before they settled on the plastic soldier angle, which explains why I'm not shooting guys in a kitchen or a sandbox or big old bathtub or whatever. They likely already had the tile sets and mapping tools for these admittedly kind of mundane real-world locations and figured, fuck it, we can't let this go to waste. And so, arriving at the toy soldiers thing instead of starting with it, the concept is almost completely squandered. But despite that, I think taken for its own merits, this game has a lot of character. In place of getting to basically play out that scene in Toy Story, I have come to appreciate the tone that we got instead. This is a weird, bleak world. There seems to be little to no signs of life. I mean, sure, you're gonna be seeing lots of other little plastic dudes, and there's housing, or buildings at least, but it all feels vacant and abandoned. Like, I can't imagine these guys going about their day-to-day lives in these places. They are beings made for war, a permanent soldier's uniform and helmet pressed into their form and a gun in hand from day one. I don't believe peace could ever exist in this world, but the world itself is very still, in large part due to the distinct lack of animation of any kind on the terrain itself. The way the maps... Jesus, what am I, 12? The way the maps are laid out as these square slices of an implied larger area makes the world of Army Men feel like an endless, empty expanse. I read Blood Meridian somewhat recently, and on more than one occasion, the descriptions of the land summoned up images of this game. Now look, I'm not really trying to compare Blood Meridian and Army Men because, one's a modern masterpiece, and one's a dumb book.
The associations don't just stop at the land, however, and it's not just because I'm a degenerate either. Army Men has a penchant for blunt, unceremonious violence.
Soldiers melt or are outright blown into chunks of plastic. Often when killed with bullets or being ran over by vehicles, their corpses will be missing limbs or mangled in some way. I'm sure the team delighted in this, knowing they got the pass, basically, by electing to make their soldiers plastic. That said, the violence is in no way flashy like a Mortal Kombat.
It feels appropriately grim for warfare based on World War II weaponry. These elements, along with the sparse music, give this game a very surreal feel a lot of the time.
And despite shortcomings of the gameplay, I just want to explore these maps, check out every little nook and cranny. I just like this world. Even your lifeline back to command feels distant and ethereal. A voice that only identifies himself as HQ, who pops in at the start and end of missions to give you instructions or pat you on the back. He sort of sounds like Wendigoon.
Sarge, free as many of our soldiers as you can from the prison camp in Sector B3.
But besides him, we don't really see or hear anything of the nation back home we're fighting for.
Only if I could bring those bazookas with me.
Feels like Sarge is out here all alone, drifting through the expanse, following orders that come out of a little radio he carries. Look, I know I'm looking pretty deep into what may as well be a byproduct of laziness, or more likely a result of minimal dev time, but regardless of reason, this is the way the game is.
It's how it feels.
Now that I've spent time jerking off the game's tone, I have to say the game isn't exactly a looker, or a player for that matter, but we'll get there.
It's kinda ugly, and the lack of animation I brought up earlier as a positive for the vibe does kinda make it feel cheap. Army Men's visuals are done with pre-rendered graphics.
Which twist is dial? 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 Which twist is dial at the time?
Sorry. I'll always like this look, and that's probably purely nostalgia.
I could understand not liking it, but for me that's impossible.
That said, however, even for 1998, these graphics were a little basic. I mean, shit, Fallout 1 came out a year before, and it's far more detailed and clean looking. Well, not literally, there's shit everywhere. It's a mess. And for something in the same genre, here's Commandos from the same year. Enemy Infestation from the same year, same genre too. Mech Commander. You get it, it wasn't exactly pushing the envelope. Whatever though, right? Graphics aren't everything, so how's the game play? Well, kinda awkward. You won't be clicking to move around Sarge. No, he has tank controls, and that could feel pretty unwieldy on an isometric perspective. You can use the mouse to aim, but that won't work how you're expecting. Instead of the cursor moving freely, it rotates a fixed distance around Sarge, which would be weird enough if the mouse functioned how you'd expect, but it doesn't. Instead of moving this reticle closest to where you position the mouse, it acts more like mapping your buttons to rotate left or right onto the mouse movement itself. Sliding the mouse horizontally left will rotate Sarge to his left, and the opposite motion doing the same but rotating him to his right. This can lead to some real fucked moments where you're moving the mouse one way but the reticle is moving the other way due to Sarge's orientation. Don't use the mouse, it's my advice. Due to Sarge's tank controls, there's no strafing. You'll have to be standing still facing or moving towards whatever you want to shoot. Everything else from switching weapons to calling an air support or commanding your fellow little green boys is done with the keys you want, because you can map them. That's a weird way to say that. Sarge himself has a variety of actions he can take, like rolling left or right, crouching and going prone. He can command allied soldiers to follow him or attack or defend locations. He can call in airstrikes or drop paratroopers onto the field. There's even 4 vehicle types he can drive. Almost all of this is accompanied by Sarge spouting little quips and one-liners. His voice, provided by one of the developers, Scott Ruggles, I believe, is perfect for a no-nonsense, straight-shooter 1940s soldier type.
A mortar. Some grenades. These'll come in handy. First aid. That'll take the sting off it.
In his dryness is enough charisma to make me really like this little guy, even if he's visually indistinguishable from every other motherfucker in this game. I guess he gets a little sergeant insignia on his helmet sometimes, but you can't see that from up here. Look, I'm gonna say it, he's the far better Sarge. Jim Cummings? More like Jim Goings. Get this fucking loser out of here.
Of course, being a war game, there are weapons aplenty to utilize on your miniature warpath.
All the classic staples you'd imagine are here, you know, a bazooka, grenades, a flamethrower, and even more period-specific weaponry like the mortar and mines.
For the most part, these behave exactly how you'd expect, and are even pretty satisfying in some cases, like the flamethrower, which can obliterate crowds in seconds, crowds you'd otherwise have to chew up individually with rifle fire or get lucky with a well-placed explosion. The mortar is a highlight for me, the power granted to you by being able to dispatch groups of enemies and tanks from outside their aggro radius feels great.
What isn't as satisfying is managing said weapons. Sarge has 3 weapon slots, a primary, which will always have a rifle or the auto rifle if you manage to pick one up, a secondary slot which can hold most other weapon types, bazooka, flamethrower, mortar, etc., and the third slot which is used for utility things like the minesweeper, the medkit, and mines. Now this doesn't sound bad so far, but it's more the way the system is implemented. See, weapons come in these crates. So let's say I got 3 grenades, right? And I find another box of grenades. Well, what do you think will happen if I pick it up? You know, it'll add to my grenade count, right? I'll have like 9 grenades. No, in order to pick up these grenades, I'll either need to use up my current supply or drop this stack onto the ground, and then pick up the other box of grenades. It's strange, and I assume it must have been a choice. I mean, there's no way they programmed all this other shit and they couldn't figure out a way to add ammo to your weapon if you pick up another one. I mean, like, I barely know dick about coding, and I at least know the path to get to that happening. I guess if I squint real hard, I can sort of see the logic. Like, if there's a whole ass flamethrower in this box, and I find another complete flamethrower, I guess Sarge isn't gonna pop open the tank and try to pour the fuel from one into the other, spilling it all over himself, making a big old mess. It still doesn't explain the grenades, though. Unfortunately, because of this system, oftentimes you'll find yourself backtracking to pick up another weapon after you've used up your current one, and Sarge is in no hurry to get there, or anywhere for that matter. The whole game is a bit slower paced, in fact. Sure, once you're in combat, things can get frantic, but it's all the moments of getting to the combat, deciding when and if to engage, positioning yourself, or taking the long way around to place mines or get a better vantage point for your mortar strikes. All that shit's slow. And that slowness is what makes up the tactical portion of this game. Having the entire map before you, knowing what you gotta do, and then approaching it with caution, because without caution you'll die and lose huge chunks of progress, because there's no save feature or checkpoints outside of the 2 or 3 per level after completing some major objective. For example, take this mission where we gotta rob a bank in this little tan town. We're all the way up here and we have an entire town with buildings and walls to navigate. Of course, the town is crawling with soldiers and patrolling tanks, none of which you'll be able to see at first unless you use a recon, which is an item you can pick up that temporarily reveals all enemies on the map. Otherwise, you're gonna have to huff it around and see for yourself what's where. There are several ways you could go about achieving this. You could storm the front entrance, gunning down the guards. You could blow a hole in the wall somewhere else. You could sneak all the way around to the backside to gain entrance. Regardless of what you choose, you won't save until you make it all the way down here and rendezvous with your little dudes. I chose to try and tackle as many tanks as I could before getting here, trying to deal with as much as I could before grabbing the checkpoint. Patiently sneaking around the buildings, using my mortar and limited airstrikes to take them out. As I systematically made my way through, I'd lay mines in the archways to catch the tanks that would surely show up when I started robbing the bank. I wanted to have as easy of a time as possible once I snagged that checkpoint and got my men moving in for the heist. After some 30 minutes, I had positioned weapon boxes near the bank and had laid out every single mine I could find. Just as I was finishing up and about to head to the rendezvous point, I accidentally stepped on my own mine, and I had to start all over. That probably sounds frustrating, and yeah, it certainly can be. Especially when you die to dumb shit like your own men running you over, or accidentally blowing yourself up with a mortar because you don't understand how the geometry works.
Sarge is dead.
But I do think the limited checkpoints have merit. They do make the game feel intense. You're not going to fuck around when you're balls deep into a level and there's so much progress on the line. That's not to say that this is always a good thing, though. Later into the game, this can become more frustrating than engaging a lot of the time. That said, though, you're rarely ever outright thrown into combat. Usually you have the element of stealth on your side, at least initially.
A single soldier lurking around the perimeter and examining your enemy's defenses looking for weak points. That said,
it's almost never a good plan to go in guns a-blazing, especially if tanks are present. If they catch sight of you, they'll generally make a beeline to run you over, instantly killing you. And weaponry capable of taking down tanks, like the bazooka or mortar, require you to stop and fire them. Meaning, unless you have a sizable distance between you and the tank, you're not stopping it in time.
enemy soldiers can pose a big problem too. I mean, sure, the basic rifle guy is not the biggest deal, but in a group, they can shred your health pretty quick.
And rifle guys are not the only types of guys you'll be encountering. Frequently, soldiers will have grenades and mortars, meaning they can hit you from further away and from behind cover.
Bazooka dudes are pretty dangerous too. If you're not at full health, one shell from the old noob tube is going to take you down.
Worst of all, though, are these guys. The flamethrower guy. When he spots you, he'll take off running in your direction, all the while spraying a constant stream of fire. If this guy gets in range, you either take him out or die.
While this is archaic and clunky, I actually think it plays into what strengths the game does have. I find this slower, methodical approach to be pretty enjoyable. The feeling of infiltrating enemy territory, outmanned and outgunned. It can be messy, sure, but I think there's more good than bad on this front. The times I die late into a level would frustrate me, but more often than not, I was ready to give it another shot.
That's not to say that there's no outright bullshit in this game, because there is. Some of the mission design is of the
Asshole-ish variety.
A good example is the mission right after the bank robbing one. Now that your boys have loaded up the plastic, which is the currency we robbed from the bank. A pound of flesh, huh? It's a little more literal in this world. Anyways, it's up to you to escort them through a gauntlet of soldiers and tanks, a lot of which roll in from off-screen at a set time when the truck is near them, so you'd have no way of knowing that that was going to happen unless you witnessed it happen. It's purely trial and error, and the solution that I came to was to get ahead of the truck and place the mines where these tanks would show up, trying to stay ahead of the truck, but also running around taking out these guys in the truck's path. I mean, everybody hates escort missions, but this one is exceptionally dickish. There's also large chunks of the Alpine campaign and the majority of the Bayou campaign, which like to starve you of weaponry and overwhelm you with tons of guys and tanks, just fuckers everywhere. The final mission of the Alpine is particularly frustrating, having you break some green dudes out of a prison camp and then escaping to a helipad, and there's just tons of fuckers everywhere and limited munitions to deal with all of it.
This is even more of a problem in the last act of the campaign, the Bayou, where sometimes you'll find weapons with one ammunition. I mean, what's even the point? And you're expected to deal with these winding paths full of guys behind cover of all types, bazooka men, mortar guys, tons of flamethrowers. It's just a fucking nightmare. During the recording of this last section of the game, I just became the fucking AVGN. I was Chris Bores. I was red in the face. I was throwing out fucks. I was throwing out shits. It was horrifically embarrassing. I'm glad no one was around to hear it.
There are high points with the mission design, however. A lot of them are based on old films. It just feels like the boomers who made this game were genuine fans of old war movies and westerns, and they wanted to pay homage. References to movies like A Bridge Too Far, with the mission called A Bridge Too Long. A mission where you blow up a train, most likely based on the bridge over the River Kwai. Even the bank heist mission, named Sarge's Heroes, is based on the film Kelly's Heroes, and probably where the spin-off series, or whatever you want to call it, Sarge's Heroes got its name from. I mean, shit, there's even a mission just called The Great Escape. Those are just a few. I wouldn't be surprised if there were more. I'm hardly a film head, and especially not an old war movie guy. I think, though, that this passion bleeds through. There's a palpable charm to the game all over because of this. Something lacking in the later games, and a large reason this avoids feeling as shovelwary as those games. It feels like the developers working on this wanted to make it. They had these creative ideas they wanted to implement. I mean, they wanted to play with their toys. Had the Germans been more lax with their censorship, maybe Sarge would have been a pastiche of characters from these films. We probably would have spent the game blasting our way through Nazis and rescuing American POWs. Through this lens, the game, and to some extent the rest of the franchise, makes a little bit more sense. This was the foot it all started on and couldn't seem to shake. Likely why the later games still have the plastic world, as opposed to taking the more obvious route of just staging everything in our world, aping Toy Story more or less. It also explains why this game feels more mature than the premise would have you believe. I mean, look at this title screen. Could you imagine if these were actual bodies? It's a war game, first and foremost. Not interested in whimsy outside of cute little animations like having the soldiers take position of their real-world counterparts when doing things like shooting or lying prone or minesweeping. Or how the tanks flip over to reveal a hollow underside when they're destroyed. But it's all very reserved. Aside from the individual vignettes of the missions themselves, there is an overarching plot involving Sarge getting 3 keys to his super weapon before the Tan themselves can. After snagging the second one, it becomes more obvious that these are in fact Tinker Toys that lock together to form a triangle, hinting that the super weapon isn't of this world. I think the final act and reveal is actually pretty fun. The last leg of Sarge's journey takes him into the Bayou, the home of the Grey Army. The Grey Army are functionally identical to the Tan. They'll behave the same way as any of the enemies you've encountered up until this point. However, the fun new wrinkle is that they are equally opposed to the Tan and the Green, meaning you'll often find yourself in 3-way firefights between the factions. I mean, there's even a mission named Melee à Trois, if it wasn't clear enough. Whatever this weapon is, it lies here in the heart of Grey Country, and they don't want us or the Tan finding it. The Bayou's a cool setting. I like the color palette and the architecture. It feels very much like the American South. I mean, shit, the last mission is called Bourbon Street. This combined with the soldiers here being gray, I have to wonder if they were meant to invoke the Confederates? An interesting decision for sure. Thinking about it, the whole game is very North American, very United States. The desert act is evocative of the Western genre, and the mountainous alpine region feels right at home too. And now this, the swamps of the South, evoking the Civil War. It's like a mashup of wars and westerns, the colored factions always at war with each other, almost like a kid's fantasy of what war is, lacking depth or any deeper meaning to the conflict. I'm starting to think maybe the tone I spoke of earlier was more intentional than I had considered. Maybe these 3DO guys are all right. Compounding this is the final area of the game, right before we reach the super weapon, which we now know is some kind of portal. As we fight our way through Bourbon Street, we finally make it to a large graveyard, the last obstacle between Sarge and his ultimate goal. As he enters, the gates close behind him, locking him in. Suddenly, a large-scale fight breaks out between the Tan, the Grey, and Sarge. Despite how many are slain, more soldiers rise up from the ground and continue fighting forever. Almost as if the energy from the portal compels these soldiers to wage a never-ending war. Maybe suggesting that if this whole world is predicated on a child's imagination of perpetual conflict between these colored armies, that its influence is strongest here, near the portal, driving these dead men to rise and fight once again, not unlike how a kid would play with these guys, maybe dead and defeated in one imaginary scenario, only to be picked up and played with again and used in another. Yeah, I don't know, I'm probably looking way too deep into this, but nonetheless, this place has an eerie vibe. It's the only area in the game with an ambient soundtrack, and it's, a little spooky. After realizing the futility of continuing to fight, Sarge makes his escape by destroying a statue. As he makes his way through the last stretch of swampland, he begins seeing objects not of this world. Blocks and jacks, another Tinker Toy, not unlike the keys we've struggled so hard to collect. As Sarge reaches the edge of the map, he sees before him a structure made of Legos. A portal to another world, and beside it a pedestal. A pedestal with a slot perfectly shaped for the key we've fought so hard to acquire. As he inserts the key, the portal comes to life with a blue energy, and Sarge cautiously approaches it. And without radioing HQ, he steps through.
As the last shot of Sarge pans out, it is revealed to us he's standing on a kitchen counter in our world. I actually love this ending. It feels like such a cool payoff to introduce this supernatural angle right here at the end. And it makes the world that we're familiar with seem alien and terrifying. Can Sarge even come back? Or will he forever be trapped in a world completely unsuited and unaware of him? Well, no. There are 2 sequels. We can find out pretty quick what happens to him. But hey, it's still pretty fucking good. It's funny how games age, and how there's almost a legacy skill for older generations of games. I grew up with this game, sticking my fingers on WASD and piloting Sarge around. It feels okay to me. I bring this up to say I'm not so sure I could recommend this game to people. I couldn't imagine someone more acclimated to modern control schemes even attempting to fuck with this, and I completely understand. It'd be like somebody trying to convince me to edit this video by cutting film together. I never had to do that. I've always had editing software available to me. I don't know the old ways, and I could see myself easily getting frustrated knowing I could accomplish something like a simple cut in an instant with a computer. And to be honest, that's not even really an apt metaphor. These controls were fucked up even back then. I think most games of this nature had competent mouse aim. I also don't know if I could call the game wholly fun. I feel like the Desert Act strikes a really good balance of challenging and fun, and I think the mission that best exemplifies that is the bank heist mission I spoke of earlier. I like how open-ended it is. I know where I gotta go, but it's up to me as the player to figure out how best to get that done. I think if the game had more mission structure like that, it'd be better overall for it. My point of this video wasn't really to go in on how jank Army Men is, but to sort of reflect on it and how it captured my imagination. It was a solid enough foundation, and I wish we lived in a world where 3DO decided to take its time with this series, focusing on quality over quantity. By today, I'm sure the series would be dead regardless, but maybe in that world, the franchise would have garnered enough goodwill to warrant an Army Men remolded or something of the like. As a last little aside here, YouTuber and Army Men fanatic Zen Ivan has posted the source code to this game online sometime back in 2022. He's also responsible for the upscaled 4K footage of some beta content that was in one of the trailers for this game that I used in this video, so thank you. The series is undoubtedly dead as dick in any official capacity, but who knows, maybe with these resources available, something new could be made and the franchise could live on as a niche little thing. I'd like to see that. And Zen, if you're watching this was a joke, right? I don't want to believe that you've played this game longer than I've held a single job in my entire life. If this is real, I guess you're the most qualified person on the planet to do something with the source code. There's plastic in your blood, in your DNA, and I'm not talking about the microplastics that are slowly killing us all. Well, thanks for watching.